Alright, this lecture, we're going to look at some problems with the functionalist account of the mind. As we recalled in the last lecture, functionalism was pretty promising in that it seems to have overcome many of the weaknesses of some other philosophies of mind. So, we recall then that functionalism is I got an email. Functionalism is an attractive theory because it harnesses the strengths of both behaviorism as well as the strengths of the identity theory of mind. Typically, this isn't just true in philosophy, but as well in the sciences. Oftentimes, we'll have two competing theories that have their strengths and weaknesses, and you're looking for this theory that seems to, dispense with the weaknesses, but carry over the strengths. Right now, physicists are trying to find a theory that kind of unifies quantum mechanics and kind of Einstein's special and general theory of relativity, for example, and they're trying to find this theory that kind of unifies both, and I think part of that would be by a theory that has the strength of both without the weaknesses. And we find this in plenty of other domains as well. So, the functionalist characterization, though, of the mental states is too broad. Alright, so Coke machines, cigarette lighters, sausage grinders, and thermostats, and many other things can be functionally defined. But we wouldn't say that they have mental states like pain or fear or pleasure. So philosophers need to find a way to distinguish functionally defined mental states from functionally defined non-mental states. So recall, a Coke machine, in the last lecture I said there's a sense in which a Coke machine can be said to desire 10 cents. Well, now we want to find a theory that says, no, you can functionally define what a Coke machine does, but we don't want to identify that with a mental state. Coke machines just don't desire stuff. So, in this lecture, we're going to look at some attempts to do just that. To come up with a principled way to distinguish between mental and non-mental functionally defined states. And we're going to assess this, whether or not there is a successful way to accomplish this. So, do philosophers have two candidates then? Two marks of the mental that you would find in mental states, but you won't find in non-mental states. And the question is if we can find these in, if we can do this while still being functionalists. So these two features are intentionality and qualia. What do I mean by that? Well, I'm about to get to that. We'll start with intentionality. So for a mental state to be intentional, we don't mean, people say all the time, I intend to do this. So-and-so intends this. So-and-so murdered Phil rather than just merely killing Phil because so-and-so intended to kill Phil. So this notion of intent that's relevant to the law and psychology, that's not what we mean by intentional. Instead, this is a technical term that philosophers use. And it's this feature of many mental states in which they are about or of or for something. So when I talk about intentionality in this lecture, then I'm talking about how this aboutness. So think about it. Think about an elephant. All right. There's some sense in which your mental state is about an elephant. All right. Take someone's having a belief about Martians. For example, Phil believes that Martians exist. Well, Phil's belief is about something. There's something that belief is about. It's about Martians. Or Joe's desire for water. Well, Joe's desire for water has this kind of aboutness to it. It's about water. It's for water. John's fondness for wearing beef jerky underpants, which I won't go into more depth on. So, many of our mental states have this qualitative feature. For example, there is a way it feels to be in pain. Feeling thirsty is different. I'm sorry. Let me go back. So, qualia is not the same thing as intentionality. Qualia is the other mark of the mental that we would want to find. And what do I mean by that? Well, it's just qualia comes from the word qualitative, I suppose. And it's another feature of our mental states, where many of our mental states have this kind of qualitative feel. So, for example, there's a way it feels to be in pain. Feeling thirsty is different from feeling hungry. There's a way it feels to take a bath in warm water that's different from taking a bath in rattlesnakes. Well, we'd say in these cases that a person has qualia. They're aware of a qualitative feel to their mental states. Take the example of someone seeing the color red for the first time. So we know you could be a physicist who's colorblind, who knows everything there is about the color red, and so far as you are a physicist, you know where it lies in the color spectrum. You know what it does to the nervous system when someone else sees a red thing. But suppose that you have never seen the color red yourself, and then one day you get some magical eye surgery, or you're no longer colorblind, and you see the color red. Well, that experience of the actual color red versus just knowing physical facts and true descriptions about the color red is what that qualitative feel, or that qualia, comes in. There is a what it is like to see the color red, and that's a mark of the mental. Then it's just what it is likeness. Okay, so many mental states then are both intentional and they have qualitative features. My loathing of unicorns is about unicorns, and it feels a certain way. There is a way it is like for me to loathe unicorns. Well, then the task for the functionalist is to capture these essentially mental features and do it in such a way that no Coke machine or sausage grinder could possess it. So we don't want to say that sausage grinders have these mental states. There's no intentionality to it. There's no qualia. There is not a what it is like to be a meat grinder. Okay? There is a what it is like, for example, for a bat to use echolocation, but it is not a what it is like to just grind up sausage. All right, and it's because the former is mental, the latter is not. Well, this is going to be difficult for functionalism. For functionalism is committed to the following thesis: for any two things, x and y, if x and y are functionally equivalent, then it is not possible that x and y have different mental states. So it's this kind of supervenience, I suppose, is a technical term philosophers use. There can be no difference between x without a difference in y, and vice versa. Okay? So when Carl sits on a tack, that's a meat wad placed on a seat, his brain is going to be in some state, and this state is causally related to his behavioral output in the various states of his nervous system and that are affected by his sitting on the tack. Well, this leads us to what's called the thought experiment of absent qualia. So it's basically functional states without the qualia, and we're going to show that that's possible. If that's possible, that's a problem for functionalism, because it means that functionalism can't account for qualia. So sensory inputs in Carl are sending signals to Carl's brain when he sits on the tack. Other neurons in his brain are cause motor output neurons to send signals to his muscles, and these cause him to jump and shriek. And it's important to note that his feeling of pain is playing this functional role in his overall neural system. Well, then here's the thought experiment. This is the absent qualia thought experiment. And this is a thought experiment that poses a serious challenge to the functionalist account of the mental. Suppose there's a robot that looks just like Carl from the outside. It's indistinguishable to anyone but a neuroscientist with, say, an fMRI machine. On the inside, of course, is something completely different from the real Carl. On the inside of robot Carl, connected to the sensory input neurons, are radio transmitters, and a series of receivers are connected to motor output neurons controlling behavioral output. So this robot Carl can get sensory input from the 5 senses, from touch, sight, smell, and so on. But it doesn't get processed by his brain. Instead, it gets sent via radio signals somewhere else. And then his behavior. Robot Carl is moving around. Robot Carl moves around just like regular human Carl. Okay? Talks, walks, except that that behavior is not controlled by the brain. Instead, it's controlled by, the source of the radio signals. So the sensory input signals send radio signals somewhere, and then they're sent back to Carl's brain from that same source. So this robot internally has no brain. Okay? In place of a brain, instead it's supposed that we arrange all of the inhabitants of China. All right? And just suppose for right now that there's one person in China for every neuron in the real Carl's skull. Just bear with me on this, okay? It doesn't matter, though. I mean, obviously there's a lot more neurons in a person's brain than there are persons in China, but suppose it's in the future and there's a lot more people in China, or replace it with whatever country you like, or whatever planet, doesn't matter. That's, okay? So the people in China are arranged in such a way that they can do all the jobs that the real Carl's brain's neurons would do. Now, the remarkable abilities of Carl's brain are due to the system of neurons that is, of course, it's very complex and it acts very quickly. However, the job of each neuron like each Chinese citizen, is pretty simple. It's input and output. And it does these inputs and outputs according to simple rules. So those of you that are biology or pre-med or neuroscience or cog science that know about neurons know that they have axons and dendrites. And basically neurons send and receive signals to other neurons and then eventually to other parts of the nervous system. So and neurons are basically they're kind of shaped like that, like on a circuit board. They have inputs and outputs. They send neurotransmitters and they receive neurotransmitters. Pretty simple. So we'll just, instead of neurons, we'll have persons in China do that job instead. Well, the people in China wear headsets, and they receive signals sent via radio transmitters from the robot sensory inputs or neighboring workers. Think of the relationship of mental states to sensory input and the relations of mental states to other mental states. So a person in China P gets signal 11 and sends signal 31 according to certain rules, whatever. All right. So the people in China are acting the same way the neurons in regular Carl's brain would act. They get a signal, and then based on certain rules, they send the signal. And based on what the signal is and who it's from and the rules, they'll either send it to the person to the left or the right or in front of him or whatever, all right? So it'd be like a headset dance party. Okay, so these signals eventually return to Robot Carl, causing Robot Carl to act in certain ways. So when Robot Carl sits on attack, signals travel from sensory nerves, which are then transmitted to China, where they are processed in a functionally equivalent way that the brain processes them. And other signals are returned, causing Robot Carl to jump and shrink. Well, here's the problem. As far as functionalism is concerned, Robot Carl is in the same state as the real Carl, when the real Carl is in pain. And by the same state, I mean the same type of state. Because, well, the relationships between the inputs, outputs, and other states are the same. That's a problem, though. We wouldn't say that Robot Carl is in pain, because that means that the population of China is in pain just by sending these radio signals back and forth. But that's absurd. Something essential to pain is missing in Robot Carl. Well, it's the feeling of pain. Robot Carl acts as if he were in pain, and there is a state of the people in China causally mediating Robot Carl's behavior, doing the same job as the real Carl's pain state. So, on functionalism, Robot Carl is in pain. But this is clearly false. There is no pain in China or in the Robot Carl. The people of China aren't in pain. At least in that sense that they're sending radio signals back and forth in a certain way. Okay? That's just absurd. So the functionalists can't account for these mental states that essentially have qualitative features. For on the functionalist account, certain systems are said to instantiate pain when they clearly don't. So here's our argument. If functionalism, then it is not possible for two things, x and y, where x is not identical to y, to have the same functional states, but differ in their mental states. Premise 2. It is possible for Carl and Robot Carl to have identical functional states and different mental states. Namely, Carl feels pain, while Robot Carl does not feel pain. So, functionalism is false. Note, the kind of logical possibility involved in premises 1 and 2 is logical possibility. Basically, there's no contradiction in supposing 1 or 2. So functionalism, it's not logically possible for Carl and Robot Carl to have different mental states. It'd be a contradiction. But surely it is logically possible for Carl to feel pain and Robot Carl to not feel pain. For Robot Carl, after all, just is a mechanical body connected to the population of China. So if you assume functionalism, it's not possible. But if you don't assume functionalism, it's obviously possible. So that's a problem for functionalism, all right? So if you think it's not possible, so if you think real Carl feels pain, but a bunch of people in China with headsets isn't in pain, then you're going to have to agree that the argument succeeds against functionalism. All right, well, there's another problem with qualia. Instead of absent qualia, like in the case of Robot Carl, this case involves inverted qualia. What do I mean by that? Well, two people can call an object green. However, there's this guy Phil, and when he calls an object green, his qualia are the qualia you and I have when we see red things. All right, so we could both be staring at a tree with green leaves, but the leaves will look red to him. But he's been taught to associate the word green with what would appear red to us. Makes sense. So then what Phil and you call a red object is an object that causes Phil to have what you and I call red qualia. So Phil's qualia are inverted. We both stop, Phil and I, at red lights, and we both go at green lights. But if you were to take a Phil's eye view of the world, you would see that what Phil calls green is red, and what Phil calls red is green. So it's inversion then. His qualia are inverted. All right. Well, suppose that you could create an inverting lens for Phil. So when Phil wears these inverting lenses, he'll say, aha, red things now look the way green things used to look, and vice versa. Well, imagine this instead. Imagine that there are some identical twins, one of whom has the inverting lens installed at birth. Both of these twins grow up normally, and at age 21 are functionally equivalent. So here's my twin brother. Well, what's the moral of the story? The moral of the story is that two people could be functionally equivalent. Both Phil and you stop at red lights, where each of them is in the same relation to inputs, outputs, and other states, and yet have very different mental states. We could have different mental states because we have different qualitative experiences, different qualia. So clearly then a mental state like experiencing red has its qualitative features essentially. It wouldn't be a sensation of red unless it looked a certain way. Well, functionalism does not capture this. All right. Oh, I have another email. Because according to functionalism, they'd be the same mental states, but we and I both know that they would not be the same mental states. So here's our second argument against functionalism from the inverted spectrum case. Premise 1, if functionalism, then all mental states can be functionally defined. Premise 2, if all mental states can be functionally defined, then it is not possible for two people to have equivalent functional states and different mental states. Premise 3, qualitative states are mental states. 4, so it is possible for two people to differ with respect to their qualitative states but have equivalent functional states. 5, so mental states cannot be functionally defined. 6, so functionalism is false. Alright, premise 1 is just the functionalist thesis. Premise 2 is a consequence of it. Premise 3 is a truism that we all accept. If you think your experience of redness is a mental state, then you think premise 3 is true. Premise 4 is from that thought experiment we just did with the inverted spectrum. Alright? So, and in fact, the one with the twins with the goggles could actually happen. Some mad scientists could actually do that. All right. So, well, if you accept the premises, you have to accept the conclusions. That's how logic works. All right. Now let's talk about intentionality briefly. Many mental states have an intentional character. They're about something. They stand for something. They represent something. They have propositional content. So take the proposition P. Martians are invading the Earth. Well, you can believe it. You can doubt it, you can fear it, or you can hope for it. All right? So what it is that you believe, doubt, fear, or hope is the intentional content. So believing, doubting, fearing, hoping are what philosophers call propositional attitudes. They are mental attitudes that you can take towards the content of propositions. So for example, you can believe or doubt the same thing. You can fear or hope for the same thing. I can fear that it's going to rain this weekend because I want to go camping. Or I can hope that it's going to rain this weekend, the exact same weekend, because I'm a farmer and I need to, my crops need some water. I can believe that God exists or I can doubt it. All right, so what you're doing, this aboutness of your believing or your doubting is the intentional character then. And it doesn't make sense to say that like a vending machine believes that stuff. There's just these kind of mental states. Other mental states, while not having a propositional content, are still about certain things. A mental image of Darth Vader, a memory of last night's dinner, being conscious of the smell from that guy on the bus, and so on. So, functionalism, however, has difficulties addressing the intentional nature of some mental states. So, actually, one of the first philosophers to really develop functionalism as a theory of mind, Jerry Fodor, writes, the functionalist account of mental states does not by itself provide the required insights about intentionality. Mousetraps are functionally defined, yet mousetraps do not express propositions and they are not true or false. Mousetraps don't have mental states. Consider Robot Carl again. Robot Carl, which includes the entire population of China, could be arranged so that it is functionally equivalent to the real Carl when he believes the proposition M that Meatwad put termites in Carl's house. However, even though Robot Carl is functionally identical with Carl, it doesn't seem to have a belief about Meatwad as Carl does. That is, it seems that the functionalist cannot even account for the aboutness of Carl's belief about Meatwad with functionalism alone. So then the charge is that while functionalism is necessary for accounting for the mental, it's not sufficient. So functionalism gets something right about the mental. It's just not the whole story. It's part of the story. It's just not the whole story. And this is kind of the way we could probably conclude then. It gets us there, but not all the way there. Okay. It's just like if we were trying to make a discovery about the nature of squares, and we discovered that squares have 4 sides. That's not the whole of the story, but it's definitely a part of the story. Well, functionalism, that's what we mean about functionalism as well. So functionalism are aware of this problem, though. Some of them actually do want to say that, no, we can explain it all. We're not just a part of it, we're the whole of it. We can explain all of it. So how would they respond? Well, one attempt is to point out that since symbols can be about things, there may be some parallel between the intentional character of language and thought. Well, Fodor writes again, assume that there are such things as mental symbols, mental representations, ooh, I have an email, and that mental symbols have semantic properties. That is, they can be true or false. On this view, having a belief involves being related to a mental symbol, and the belief inherits its semantic properties from the mental symbol that figures in the relation. Mental processes, like thinking, perceiving, learning, and so on, involve causal interactions among relational states, such as having a belief. Well, later on, though, Jerry Fodor realized the error of his ways. Or at least, he found his ways errorsome. And he has some considerations for why appealing to symbols won't actually succeed in helping functionalism. So symbols in human language have derived meaning. So take the string of symbols DOG, dog. It means those 4-legged creatures over there that run around, because in a sense our thoughts about dogs are about those 4-legged creatures. So the artificial symbol dog then has a derived meaning. It's only meaningful in virtue of our thoughts, which don't have a derived meaning. Our thoughts are intrinsically meaningful. So my thoughts of Fido are intrinsically meaningful, intrinsically representational, whereas the string of letters DOG is derivatively meaningful, okay? It gets its meaning in virtue of the mental, all right? But appealing to symbols then, such as DOG, to explain intentionality, when those symbols can only have derived meaning, can only result in our thoughts having derived meaning as well. So if symbols such as DOG have derived meaning, and we're going to appeal to those to explain the aboutness of our mental states, then it means our mental states could also only have derived meaning, but that's false. Our mental states don't have derived meaning. They're intrinsically meaningful, okay? So if our thoughts only have a derived meaning, the way the string of letters DOG has a derived meaning, then something else has to represent that 4-legged mammal without having derived meaning, or else there's an infinite regress. So you could appeal to actual dogs. Maybe it's not the mental that has the meaning. Maybe it's that actual thing over there that has the meaning, the underived meaning. But that's odd. It's weird to talk about things like dogs having meaning. They exist, and they are what are meant by thoughts, or what our thoughts are about. Second, we have thoughts that don't correspond to stuff in reality, like thoughts about dragons and unicorns and elves and fairies. But surely those thoughts have meaning. So if that meaning is derived, and again, the problem of where the underived meaning again is located, emerges again. All right. The end.